Another session of the Gallocast. Who's on the Gallocast? Well, of course, it's the Gallo brothers, Nick Gallo and Gio Gallo. Gents, welcome back.
Best part of my month is coming on this and chatting with you.
Well,
so let's get it.
Hopefully our audience feels the same way. So, as usual, we had a heck of a month in terms of compliance, ethics, and culture. So, how about Silicon Valley Bank?
What's that? What was that?
What was that? It was a small regional bank somewhere. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where to start. First of all, the quickest, greatest failure ever. $200 billion in assets wiped out in 24 hours. Then immediate step in by the Fed for a backstop and for insured depositors up to 250. And then they turned out they're going to insure all depositors as well. Then it turns out that maybe a few other things were going on, as we found out this week. There were several senior executives who sold shares of stock at the $200 figure shortly before the bank's collapse.
Like within hours, like it was maybe not even several days.
And my personal favorite is another group of senior executives borrowed over $200 million from the bank the same week of its collapse. So maybe this is just old-fashioned accounting fraud, or at least insider trading. But the Gallocast looks at it from all angles. So which one of you guys wants to start?
I'll start. So many interesting things to talk about with Silicon Valley Bank. I think, the way I look at all of this is probably the tip of the iceberg. This is not like an isolated event. Whenever Jerome Powell starts pulling his nose like he's been blowing cocaine, that's his tell for when he's lying. That's his tell for when he doesn't believe what he's actually saying. Look, there's 2 years ago. Let's talk about what maybe kicked this off. So 2 years ago, the reserve rate was basically eliminated. So our banking system is built on fractional reserve lending. That was meaning that a bank needs to retain a portion of the deposits that they are given relative to what they're able to lend out or invest. So banks historically have made sort of a spread between what rate I pay you as a depositor and what rate I'm able to get from on a loan, and I can sort of make that spread. So during COVID, there was a massive drop in the demand for loans. So how are banks going to make money? Well, they're going to buy other things. They're essentially going to make loans by buying bonds. And so they bought a bunch of bonds there was a ton of deposits that poured in from a depositor group that was, which I'll get to in a second. A bunch of those deposits poured in. Those were then invested in bonds that, in a yield chasing scenario, because yields were so low, right? Interest rates have been wildly low for a really long time. A bunch of those bonds were purchased. And then the Fed, due to all the inflation fears, the Fed starts raising the rates at a remarkable rate over the last 2 years or so. As rates go up, prices of bonds go down, right? So I bought all these bonds. Rates are going up. The value of those bonds in the short term are dropping. If I hold those to maturity, fine. I won't be insolvent. But when people start demanding their deposits back, I want my money out of the bank. I then have to get them that money. Well, the only way I can get that money is to sell the assets that money is tied up in, which are now at drastically reduced prices because interest rates have sort of skyrocketed as the Fed has tried to slow down the economy. So if you think Silicon Valley Bank is the only one who's done this, absolutely that's not true, right? Everyone was doing the same yield chasing, which is what drove up the stock market, which would drove up everyone to make those sort of compromises in terms of from a risk standpoint or from a duration balancing perspective to buy these other things. So I think if they can contain it, then great. But one interesting thing that all the other banks maybe don't have to the same degree is the consistency or the composition of the depositor base at Silicon Valley Bank. It was a bunch of different companies, but they were all these kind of risk on, as I would call them, companies kind of crypto startup kind of companies that are largely affected by the sort of changing sentiment around like how cool it is to be unprofitable. So like they all kind of move together. So when you hear all these tech companies that are startups that are burning cash that wanted to go public, well, since the market started to crater, they haven't been able to go public, and now you're seeing all these layoffs because now they have to get back to profitability. That novel thing, investing called profitability. The point is the composition of like that depositor group at Silicon Valley Bank was not that diverse, and that is a massive, massive factor in the way that whole thing played out. And just like all those VC guys, they're all buddies. They all buy their Patagonia jackets at the same place, and so like they're all in the same area, and so that kind of kicked off this really interesting turn of events that left them SOL.
Nick, usually it's your older brother who's a little passionate about these things. That's as passionate as I've heard you about a business issue. So Gio, is your little brother just running amok, or is he onto something here?
So Nick is welcome to run amok. And, I've always said that if you get a CPA talking about risk and reward, you're going to get a lot of passion. So, Nick's the older brother. So, I'm kind of riding his coattails around, and, I like, that was a great overview. I think a lot of people have heard about this thing and you're just like, oh, wow, that's crazy. Oh, there's a bank run. And, it can be hard to like get the signal from the noise when there's just like headlines all around. That's basically what was going on. I think from a, from like a risk management standpoint, it's really interesting because like, I think this is part of why we, Nick and I and our company Ethico, and I think a lot of people in the ethics space talk about culture so much, because this is really a cultural phenomenon. I think we'll see if, like you were saying, Tom, if this is just like old-fashioned accounting fraud and people were just like brazenly violating clear rules. We'll see if that comes out. What I can say before we get to that determination is there was a whole culture here at the leadership, at the people writing loans and the underwriters, and I don't know if it's the compliance and ethics team, but like at Silicon Valley Bank, and then also it pervaded into all their customers, all their depositors. That was just this let's swing for the fences type of thing.
Yep.
Which is kind of fine if you're just like rich bon vivant and you like throwing $30 million to see if this company can make a bike fly. Like that's kind of fine if you want to kind of dump your money into that. If you're a financial institution that like has contagion risk to the rest of our banking system, and you're playing this game where you're just lending to all these risky companies, maybe that's fine, right? You can kind of figure that out maybe. But then you're lending to these risky companies with like the least amount of like risk protection, right? That's what having reserves is. And then also you have this like compounding effect of like there's all of this overlap among your depositors, where one guy says, hey, I think this bank is probably like not that safe. Hey, a couple of you guys should go get your money out. That whisper just goes to the whole industry, and everyone's like, okay, I'm gonna go move it to JPM or B of A or Wells or whatever it is. Just all of that, it just seems like such a miss from a risk management standpoint. It's like, if you're gonna be lending debt to super risky, unprofitable companies, you should probably be more safe, not be like the riskiest bank around. And also, if you're a regulator, if you're the SEC, like the game is not just to avoid people like mispricing mortgage-backed securities, because that already happened in 2008, and we're probably not going to do that again. This is like my buddy who, was texting while he was driving, smashed into a stop sign, and then 3 miles down the road, he smashed into a telephone pole. And I was like, guy, what were you doing? He's like, well, I didn't smash into that stop sign again. And also, I didn't even smash into a stop sign. This is a completely new thing. It's not really a new thing. It's just like risk of contagion. And it just seems like here's a big question. Maybe we can put this to the audience of two. Do you think that this was like people asleep at the wheel, or do you think that the system of incentives clearly incentivized these people to play this game like this? Like, do you think that they were so caught off guard by it? Or do you think they were like, hey, you know what? I'm going to put a big stack. I'm going to play roulette and put it all on red. And I know that's a super risky bet, but you know what? I'm willing to do it, and it's probably going to work out fine for a while. What do you think, Nick? You think that this is an incentive
100%
mismatch,
incentive.
or you think they just, like, poor guys, they just didn't really know the right way to do it?
I think it's an incentives mismatch. I think it's I mean, I guess at some level it can be both, but like,
Sure.
What are they supposed to do?
Right.
Everyone's doing it. Everyone is like, what signal did the change to the reserves send? What signal? What incentive does zero interest rate policy send? You know what I'm saying? Also, why is the Fed acting like they're so shocked by this? What do they think is going to happen when rates rise that quickly?
Right.
They're just crossing their fingers, hoping that like there's not a bank run. I mean, it's clearly a solvency issue. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're just assuming that every bank has played the duration of the bonds that they're buying in a way that anticipates the changing slope of the yield curve. It's crazy.
Right. I mean, the yield
What do you
curve
think, Tom?
right now is so wildly inverted. It's like, I think this is maybe the most inverted that it's ever been. And they say the Fed raises rates until something breaks. So maybe this is the thing that broke.
Yeah. That was what my first internship project was on when I worked in banking. I used to work for this bank. Like, it's been gone for a while, but it was called Credit Suisse. I worked at that bank one summer, and my first intern project was on inverted yield curve.
Oh, really?
Yep.
So one of the things that struck me was the speed of the bank run. I was a Washington Mutual customer many, many years ago, which had the largest bank run ever, and it took nearly 10 days to empty out Washington Mutual. Here we had it in literally 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was social media. I don't know. It was because they were all interrelated brothers in the Silicon Valley world, or perhaps something else. And I first thought, this really is new and different. But then the scene popped in my head. I could not get it out of the bank run in the original Mary Poppins. And when they said to the children, no, you can't have your money. And then somebody whispered, they can't get their money. And then all of a sudden, everyone in the bank heard they can't get their money. And then everyone outside, and they had a bank run.
Right.
And so I'm not sure it's really any different than Mary Poppins in 1908. But the speed of the collapse was truly stunning.
Yeah.
And that's sort of question one for you guys to consider. Two was, I was shocked to find that 8 months prior to the bank run, the company's chief risk officer resigned, and she was never replaced. So they were operating without a chief risk officer. And maybe, as the Mexican bandit said, we don't need no stinking horses, and we don't need no stinking risk officer.
No badges. We don't even need badges.
We don't even need that. But Matt Kelly talks about the amplification that social media has brought to different voices, but it also brings a speed component.
Yeah.
And it really drove home to me. And I used to think I could keep a handle on things, but now it's just, my head absolutely spins when I think about $200 billion evaporating 24 hours and the Fed having to meet for 48 hours to backstop the economy.
It's wild.
Is that a reality?
It's wild.
I think not only is it the reality that it's faster, but it's also predictable. You should be able, call me Monday morning quarterback. All right. Call up the Manning brothers and tell them I'm playing Monday morning quarterback, but also, like, the world is like, it's not 1908 now. Also, 1908 was probably a fast bank run because people were in a city. And if you were in, some outpost of a bank and everyone lived 2 hours away, it would take weeks for people to hear that you can't get your money out. So it's always going to accelerate, but also you got to manage the risk around that. And, I think that, a piece of this, at least one angle on the speed is that, like, the flow of information and the flow of money are both faster. So maybe those compound, right? Like you don't have to wait for someone to send an email to a bunch of people or get on a couple calls and talk to people. They tweet about it and millions of people see it. So the information flows faster. And also it's a lot faster to just like transfer that money and pull it out. And, you know, there's a lot of like interconnectedness that people could pull that money quickly. They didn't have to walk down to the bank and ask for it at the teller booth. But also that's the world that we live in. It's not like it's 2003 and like we're just figuring out what modems are. Like we live here.
Right.
I am still trying to figure out what a modem is, though.
Let's turn to another banking issue, and that was a woman named Carrie Tolstadt who pled guilty. Carrie Tolstadt was the head of Wells Fargo Community Banking, and generally credited with developing the 8 is great false accounting scandal at Wells Fargo. And I introduced that because I had dinner or lunch yesterday with a former banker from Wells Fargo, and we were, of course, talking about some of their woes. And he said to me the following: that fake accounting scandal was the stupidest thing he ever heard of when he heard about it, because what was Wells going to get out of it? A percentage point rise in stock price? He said, that's just stupid to incur potential risk for nothing. And yeah, we had a good stock. We were solid. We had weathered 08. We didn't need to cheat. And we were just cheating for gravy. It wasn't like we were cheating to save our company. And so I found that really interesting. What did you guys think of all of that?
So I think, that's an interesting perspective on it. And it might just kind of speak to how like a whisper from the top can be like a yell down below. I'm sure that CEO or that executive team's, stock options definitely played into that drive. And yeah, so, and just like the cascading effect, or like how that sort of, that desire can be amplified across the organization. And if that becomes the rallying cry and that's what people are solving for, everybody's not doing a capital asset pricing model on like what me selling this one extra, account is going to translate into the stock price. They know that they are, again, back to incentives. They know that their bonus is tied to how many accounts they open. And that, trickles up to this broader, objective of key result of the CEO's, stock options sort of vesting or whatever was in play in that at that time. But to your point, like in retrospect, that's nuts. That's nuts that they took on that much risk for something that really wasn't a needle mover in any way you want to cut it from a company wide standpoint,
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is, so I think, it's probably a valid point. I'd probably agree with it that it's not a good risk reward trade-off to do something like this, right? The damage has been far greater than whatever gain they did actually get or could have got if they like quote got away with it. But I think that there's a different dynamic at play here than someone making a poor risk reward trade-off. And it really gets to an issue of leadership, and it's kind of tied to what Nick was saying, but like, I don't imagine that someone ran a model and said, hey, why don't we push people to do this, and we'll open a bunch of fake bank accounts, and it's going to help our stock about 1%, and we might have a risk of this type of penalties and ruining our name. Someone didn't do that. It actually happened in a way where someone was pushing for something. And I think the foolish thing was the leadership, and like Wells has had like a lot of leadership turnover. So let's just kind of call it the Royal L leadership. But leadership allowing the company and the culture to exist in a way where not just one person, but thousands of people would be okay with this is really the foolish thing. Yeah. Allowing yourself to send out a message and not like say, hey, just so you know, I was talking about this and not this, not like making sure you're rooting it out, not making sure that people understand that when we say, let's hit our growth goals, we're not saying at all costs, no matter what you need to do. There's that type of stuff that like, if you're an executive, certainly if you're like a sales leader, you need to understand that like there is this moral hazard at play where individuals, right? This is just like Silicon Valley Bank. individuals can make a bet within their own sphere of influence that not only makes sense for them, even though it's bad for everybody else, but also without even understanding the broader game. And it's your job, if you manage 5 or you have 50,000 people in your downline, it's your job to make sure that that kind of stuff is going well, because that's, I think, the real thing that gets messed up is not that someone said, hey guys, here's a new strategy. I think it's worth the trade-off. We might ruin our reputation, but let's do it. It does, it's a death by 1,000 cuts or whatever, but allowing your company to elevate this thing in their mind of, getting some more growth in accounts or whatever it is above whatever, our mission or our values or our integrity or our reputation or whatever it is, letting them confuse which is more important, I think is the real tragedy there, because there's always going to be this stuff. I asked the question about like incentives with Silicon Valley Bank. Listen, those like the executives there, they have a bunch of money. Okay, they made millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, and I haven't asked them, but I imagine they're like, they don't like how it ended, but they like how it was going for a while, and they have the money and they took the risk, and now that risk is, the Fed's bailing people out and we all have to deal with the banking, the threat to banking and stuff like that. There are always going to be these micro spots of moral hazard where someone either unwittingly or willingly is going to put unnecessary risk on your organization and on your culture. And it's our job as leaders to not just be getting people excited and getting them engaged. It's not just to build a big picture and paint a big vision. It's to make sure that our team can get through the storm, can climb the mountain, and can preserve the things that are most important to us. Now, if what's most important is just making short-term profits and let's see what we can get done in this quarter, and then we'll, who cares what happens next quarter? Well, then you got to know that this kind of stuff's probably going to happen.
This first quarter of 2023 has had as many announcements from the Department of Justice as I can remember in one quarter. It started in January with the changes to the corporate enforcement policy, giving more credit for earlier self-disclosure and more extraordinary cooperation. That's more than regular extraordinary cooperation. And number two, or rather next, we had 2 speeches by Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco and Kenneth Polite announcing changes in the corporate or evaluation of corporate compliance programs, ECCP. The ECCP focuses on compliance programs, as its title suggests. And there we had some specificity around clawbacks, which we've talked about. We had a new section on, and within clawbacks, it was called consequence management. A new requirement that compliance professionals perform an in-depth analysis of salary and promotion around compliance incentives, which was new. Information around who was evaluating corporate investigators for pay or other remuneration, as well as information on ephemeral messaging, WhatsApp, and the like. You guys, I wanted to maybe start with you, Gio. You talk as passionately about incentives as anyone I know. But I'd like to ask you about non-financial incentives, promotions, and tying people's conduct to whether or not they are an ethical fit for moving up, for instance, into senior management. And how do you see the department evaluating that? Is it an appropriate evaluation, or should we be doing something else?
I actually like this one, Tom. I think I've railed against this a bunch of times, so I'm just going to take a different stance. But I think there's something about the non-financial piece that feels maybe, it's not just that it's more subjective. It just feels like it's more tied to this thing that, like, it kind of feels like if I pay you for doing the right thing, that's very transactional and you can take that money and go somewhere else. If I give you a promotion or put you into a place of leadership because you embody a bunch of these things that we're not going to just write down in an 85-point bullet point policy, but you embody the integrity and the values of our organization, and we're gonna help you be more of an influence on more people. I like that trade-off. I feel like that might balance things more over time than just the one-off pay and clawback and stuff like that. I think there's something about the spirit of it that like it feels to kind of match the like relative lack of objectivity, right? It's kind of hard to say, hey, that vendor that you didn't hire last quarter, that's worth $23,000 to us, so here's a bonus. Or that thing that you did bad, we're going to take 12 grand back from you. I feel like it's hard to like nail that down. I feel like saying, hey, you're the type of person that we believe in and that is living these things out, and we're going to elevate you to, and like this doesn't have to just be formal authority, right? This can be, we recognize you, or we're going to have you be part of this committee or whatever it is. I think those types of things have a much better chance. Maybe this is part of why I like it. They have a much better chance to kind of like multiply and compound over time, because as you do that, that person who is more of the right type of person is going to have more influence in the organization, not just be a richer or poorer person because of the compliance incentives.
Nick?
Yeah, I always look at this kind of from a persuasion lens. And if you're getting in trouble, there's going to be a lot of persuasion that needs to go, and that's going to need to be sort of enacted to persuade somebody that you're kind of taking the right steps forward. If you're building a culture, you have to persuade all the people in the organization that the value, that what you say actually matters. And so if you can incorporate these things, into those promotions and make that a pillar of what is what's considered for promotion, and people believe it, well, then that's going to have that sort of self-reinforcing benefit that we're trying to get at. If it's just, lip service, or if it's just, window dressing or whatever, then we're probably going to be in the same place that we're at now, because to some degree, no one's like, everybody already kind of pushes up against the notion that, people get different rules. Everybody wants to be a high integrity company. Everybody, says that in their job ads and all that kind of stuff. So, obviously there's all these exceptions, and we wouldn't be talking about this if there weren't. But I think at the end of the day, if it's a means by which a company can put their money where their mouth is around values, around, compliance, things like that, like building the culture that they're claiming to have, then there can be kind of some good knock-on effects. But I think the proof is going to be kind of in the pudding and how it's actually viewed.
So we had a question come in from a listener. We love questions. So it came in after during our prior discussion, Gio, that you were talking about around non-financial incentives, but it turns a little bit more towards the financial, and it reads, do you think that in turn makes a good argument for compliance leadership objectives and measures as a means of assessing year-end performance and compensation benefits or potentially clawbacks?
Just to make sure I get the question, they're saying, should we have objective measures of whether the compliance person did a good job that year and give them a bonus or a clawback based on how well they do?
Both compliance and then other senior executives, as now we have to look at from the new 2023 ECCP.
So I think broadly, what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets done. So if we care about this thing, we being the board or the stockholders or the executive or the regulators, we got to be able to measure it and manage it if we want it to be done. So I think I think I agree with most of that, with it depends on the financial piece of it, because I think that if you don't have measures for how successful is the compliance team this year at moving our culture and our risk stance forward, then you're in trouble. If it's just okay, did you get some projects done? Okay, some things are finished and everything's always hard, so then it's fine. That's a problem. And if you don't have some measures for your executive team so that you can say, hey, executive team, we care about this thing. Did you get this stuff done? Then you have a problem. I think there's a follow-on question of should your evaluation of that be just table stakes where they have to do good enough to keep their job, or should it be kind of part of a basket of things that they get evaluated on that will impact their raise and bonus and promotion or whatever? Or I think I object more and more to it when you start boxing it off and saying this $217,000 clawback is tied to this specific action. I think that there are a lot of problems with that. But broadly, you should be able to measure this stuff. You should be setting goals up around it, and you should have some tie to evaluation that ties to something that people care about, promotion, compensation, something like that. I think it absolutely has to be in the mix. I think you just have to be careful, how directly you tie one thing to another.
Nick, your thoughts?
I think it's a great argument for it. To Gio's point, whatever gets managed gets done. And now that I'm looking at this question, it's almost silly that it hasn't been sort of part of the equation to this point. It's in some level, it's a little bit sad that this stuff has to come out for us to start kind of enacting it, because it's kind of common sense. Like, what's the proof of your efficacy? You know what I'm saying? Like, it should show up. It should be everywhere. It should be all over the place, and it should be absolutely a means of assessing the end of year performance and compensation. Like, there are KPIs that we can attach to all these things, and it's up to us, I think, to make the case. I mean, this is kind of a separate issue, but it's up to us. Like, we should be, practitioners should be like pushing for this, because otherwise, like, what are you doing? You're going to avoid it. You're going to avoid some sort of way to measure your impact or efficacy. I think if you can get out ahead of it, you can help determine how that efficacy is measured. And I don't know, it's just kind of the reality of the situation. Are you moving the needle in one way or another? Like, you should be able to be held accountable for that, I think.
Yeah. And I think that this ties into something that, I think people come to Nick and me a lot, and, we end up trying to help people with this issue around getting authority and getting involvement and getting a seat at the, board and executive table for ethics experts and compliance leaders. I think it ties into that authority, and also the, can I get budget for what I need? Can I present a good ROI? I think this thing around measures of competence and performance and improvement are a great path to get there. Some of it kind of depends on who your executive is, and are they, a data gal, or are they kind of just kind of a high level, just kind of tell me a story type person. But, I would say that if you feel that in your organization, compliance isn't getting the budget that it needs, compliance is not getting the respect and the authority and the invitation to the conversation that you think it should, that your recommendations aren't heard that much, I think you should, at least one of the questions you should be asking is, have I presented compelling goals and metrics and plans and promises, and saying, hey guys, watch me, I'm about to put this number up on the board.
Right.
And then have I shown a consistent pace of me performing against that improvement? If you're not, that might be one of the reasons why it's kind of, you can say it's nefarious and these people just don't get it, but it might be that they don't have a handle on it. And it just kind of feels like, someone can measure, what's the uptime on the servers, or how fast do our pages load, or how many people on the sales team hit quota, or, what's our ads, what's our return on ad spend, or whatever it is. They can measure that in a bunch of the other divisions. If you're not handing that to your manager, to your executive, and saying, hey, here's,
Right.
here are my 3 OKRs for the year, or here are the 5 things that we should measure, and I should be able to move improvement on a bunch of these fronts, and anything that goes down, I should have a good explanation for it. If you don't have that in place, that might be either a reason, that thing that's holding you back, or it might also be something that can be your path to getting that engagement, and someone's light bulbs turning on and their eyes widening and be like, oh, really? Now I know what you're talking about. Let's go get that.
Yeah, they're means by which you can sort of prove your usefulness to the organization. And so you can nest your own OKRs up underneath your corporate, divisional, ultimate, executive OKRs, but having some way to sort of show that usefulness in a quantitative way, I think, is extremely persuasive and extremely powerful if it's done right.
Let me change the focus a fair amount with our next topic. And here I want to use the example of Memphis professional basketball player John Morant, who was caught or was on video in a gentleman's club where alcohol was served with a gun. And even in states like the great state of Texas, which has open carry, you can't take guns into places where alcohol is served for a very good reason. My initial reaction to that was that's an automatic suspension. That is actions or conduct that is completely intolerable. Turns out there may be some other things going on, and it really led me to think about he's a 23-year-old male, single male, richer than he ever dreamed of, and he may be having some mental health issues. He's in a very high stress world, professional basketball, but you guys come out of a high stress business environment, or at least my perception is you came out of one. I was a trial lawyer, so I understand that from that perspective as well. And I really wanted to have a conversation around compliance, mental health, perhaps resources available, when to ask for help, how to ask for help. Do you guys have those types of discussions with your employees that you want to help if somebody's having those issues, whether it's grief, whether it's something like John Moran or something else? How do we start to talk about that in high stress business environments?
I think the way we talk about it is by doing it, by talking about it. I think we have a philosophy that life is like a lot more like baseball than it is like brain surgery, and a war is won over the long run, not by every single step that's sort of taken. And that, coupled with the belief that we both firmly believe, or that we both firmly have, that people are our greatest asset, it opens up a lot of sort of like budget for to have those kinds of conversations, and a lot of sort of like margin for folks to take the help that they need. I find it a little bit ironic and kind of hypocritical and frankly bizarre that if you look back at the sort of industrial revolution economy, which is what we're still kind of coming out of, in that there's still many of those sort of vestigial structures and like ways of thinking that have continued to persist today. Nobody like threw a fit when you had to shut down a production line to give like maintenance to a machine, right? That's of course every machine needs maintenance. This is our greatest asset. Well, now we're in the now we're in the knowledge work economy, where we are our work, where our greatest asset is our people. Well, people need sort of maintenance as well. And this high stress thing, which has become a sort of foundational element in this American, workplace experience, it's almost become like this defining characteristic. If you're not stressed, you're not working hard. I fall victim to it myself. I mean, based on where I've come from and just kind of the natural tendencies that I have, it makes it important for leaders to like carve out that time and remind people that like we're playing a long run here, and there's very few things that you're actually going to mess up by taking a day and so forth. Obviously, we're in a for-profit business. Obviously, we want to broaden our impact. And in order to do that and sort of achieve our mission, we have to work hard and we have to win. But there's also a lot of ways to win that don't involve you just like redlining everything all the time. So I think it's incumbent upon leaders to make that space for those kinds of conversations, and also be in tuned enough with their machines, quote unquote, the people in their organization, to see what's going on with them. Like somebody could be going through something. They could be going through something personal or something health related that they don't feel safe enough to like bring out in the workplace. Well, that's on you as a leader to like create that space and create that time to have those kinds of conversations. And I think, look, I don't know what that guy's life is like. I'm sure it's extremely high pressure, and it all can fall apart at any time. But it's at least a picture of the types of stress that I think a lot of us feel. I mean, look, no one's life is easy, right? Like no one gets to the end of life and laying on their deathbed and like that was a breeze. No one says that. Life is really hard for everybody. So I'm just saying that it's on us as leaders to carve out those spaces in our organizations and in our workplaces, and view these kinds of issues less as a weakness and more as like this is natural sort of maintenance repairs and maintenance type expense, if you want to get really kind of technical about it, that we would have in any other economy type.
Yeah, it's well said, Nick. I don't know what his life is like. I think it's great, Tom, that you're asking this question. And, I think plenty of people are quick to jump on him and say, oh, well, he should know better, or shame on him, or he's a bad example, or whatever it is. But, I've always said that I can't understand somebody else until I walk a mile in their Nikes, and I can't know what it's like for him to do that. But I think we as leaders should also know that, like, there are a bunch of people in our organization who are going through things, right? It's just something called life. And if it's not happening to them, it's their family or their friends or, dreams that they have or whatever it is. And we're in this place, we can have a whole other session about who's to blame for this, but we're in this place where people don't have a lot of like social safety net around them. And I'm not talking about Medicaid. I'm talking about like a community that they can go to that like supports them in hard times. I think we've talked in prior episodes of the show about how like faith in like pillar institutions in our society, like certainly in the US and North America, like those have fallen for, government and, like involvement in social organizations and faith, belief in religion and all of that stuff. And in a lot of ways, like, the workplace is one of like the last standing places where people think, okay, maybe I'll be treated fair here, or maybe this one isn't run by a bunch of charlatans. So whether you like it or not, there are people who are coming to work at your organization who are going through trouble. And we could talk about how, hey, you just should do it because it's good for the bottom line. I think there's plenty of conversation to be had around, letting your, your human resources have time for maintenance, and downtime is good for the bottom line and helps engagement and retention and stuff like that. That's fine. We can also just say, hey, there's just an opportunity here to be a blessing to someone else's life. There's an opportunity here to build a good workplace, to be a place where people are psychologically safe, to be a place that helps people kind of get through their tough times. And even if it's not the highest ROI thing, it probably doesn't cost you a bunch to like be a place that's safe for people, that like, managers care about people, that there's a little bit of breathing room for someone to take a break in the middle of a hard day if they need to beg off a meeting or whatever it is. And I think that more, I think a lot of the generation that's rising into leadership kind of gets this intrinsically. And I think a lot of the people who are in leadership now have heard it enough that I think some of them are waking up. There's like some adoption curve going toward this kind of understanding of the importance of the workplace being a safe place that like serves the whole person. It's kind of how Nick and I, see our job as our calling and the workplace that we're building and what we're trying to do. So, I think that there's a lot of room to try to figure that out. And there's probably more space in your organization to give a little bit more attention to this without really wrecking your next quarter's earnings. All that said, I'm not perfect at this. Our organization is not perfect at this. We talk about the culture that we want to have, and it's an ideal and it's aspirational, and we're always trying to make adjustments to do that. But also, so like we don't talk about it enough. We don't have a bunch of meetings talking about, hey, here's how you should bring it up if you have a mental health issue. But we try to do stuff like we have an EAP. We try to train managers to look out for this stuff. We have employee satisfaction and engagement teams. And I just had someone this week bring something up confidentially to me and saying, hey, you know what? I'm not mad at this other person. I don't have a problem with something broadly, just this thing is hard for me and it's causing trouble for me at work. And it was, kind of a mental health issue. I won't get into more detail about it, but I think an easy step to get there is to just make your culture, whether that's your team of 3 people or your division or your whole company, whatever you can influence, a place where people feel comfortable bringing their whole self to work, speaking up and saying, hey, I need some help with something, or this isn't going well, and have them feel, like Nick said, that this is going to be dealt with on like a long-term view of like, let's help you get through this, and there's something good on the other side for me and you and the organization, instead of like, what are you talking about? You need the afternoon off. Well, you got a pay cut and, blah, blah, blah. That kind of transactional thing I don't think works well, and I think we can all be better at it.
So I want to end with a topic that started with a LinkedIn post by Nick. and I think it got as much comment as anything you posted, Nick.
Yeah, ever.
And that was a daddy-daughter dance. And you said so much in your blog post, and in the comments were so much more.
Yeah.
And I just want to throw out some things. First of all, God created no better gift for a male than a daughter.
So true.
It's so great. Up until about the age 7, because up until then they think you're God, and your job is to let them. So, then they may change. But the daddy-daughter dance is so important, not just for the daughter, but for the parent. And taking the time to do that with your daughter will pay off in spades, not only for what you get, but she will always remember that. And she'll take that with her literally forever. So, Nick, I want to throw it over to you and just open it up for both you guys, because I know you both have daughters. So tell us about the daddy-daughter dance, Nick.
It was like so cute. I mean, we got dressed up, and it was just our time together. She's my oldest daughter, and she's a middle child. So, that middle child position is a tough one because they get overlooked a lot and they feel that way. But it was just such a special, fun time together. And during it, I just remember thinking, I could see how special it was for her, and I could see a lot of what you're talking about. I could see that that we were making like a really meaningful memory. And it just kind of reminded me of, how fleeting that time is going to be. I'm sure I'm going to blink and she's going to be asking for the car keys, and I'm going to blink and I'll be walking her down the aisle, and like, it's just going to go so fast. And it gets so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day of the fires that I have to put out and the emails that are pouring in and all these problems that, you deal with and that everybody deals with, in this thing that we call work, the brambles and thistles, as they call it. But, what is it for? It's for, the people that we bring into this world and the people that we're here to support. And what's the point of it all if, you're not making those sort of foundational memories that end up, building into the type of person that, I want her to be, so it was really great. And it was, it was just so much more fun than I thought it was going to be. And, but beyond that, it was so much more like meaningful. Like it felt so substantial, and it was such a simple thing, to get her dressed up and go out for pizza and then go dance and, eat popcorn and, cookies and stuff like that. It was, it's so funny how simple it could be and yet so like impactful,
Gio?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing. My daughter's 4, so I haven't been invited to a dance yet. It's kind of story of my life. But we, her name's Lucci, and we do Lucci Papa dates. And it's just like, I think there's a thing here, regardless of whether you're a parent or regardless of whether you have a daughter. Like, if there's someone special in your life that means something to you, carve out some time and do something meaningful for them, to connect with them or to let them know how much you care about them, because I think that's a big part of it. Like I said, my daughter's 4. I don't think she's going to remember every time we went out for ice cream or something like that when she's 25, but it does communicate something to someone's heart that they're cared for and they're valuable and they're someone that is worth being treated well and treated right. And regardless of, whether you're quote unquote making memories or get a bunch of pictures or can do an Instagram post about it, just having that connection and letting somebody know that they're valued and they're loved and someone cares enough about them to treat them well is a beautiful thing to do. And in case I haven't convinced you yet, you also feel great doing it. So if you're just like a really selfish narcissist, you should also do it because it just feels good to do it.
So I have two things that happened to me when my daughter was in preschool, either 3 or 4. They had a dad day at school.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, and there was one girl whose father wasn't there. And she was inconsolable.
Yeah.
Everyone else's dad was there. And I remember the teacher walking her around, having her on her shoulder, trying to calm her down. And I just said at that moment, I said, I will never miss a dad-daughter event. My daughter will never feel like that.
Brutal.
The second was when my daughter was 7 or 8, we were going to see a ballet. We're at the will call line to get tickets. There was two couples in front and behind us. And I said to my daughter, I said, honey, what's your favorite daddy daughter date? And she looked at me without missing a beat. And she said, Dad, they're all my favorite. And I just completely melted.
Oh gosh.
But the best was the two couples around us in front and back, the girls turned around and they both said, you got that right, honey.
It's universal.
It's universal. So
That's
if you have the
beautiful,
chance to do a daddy-daughter date, a daddy-daughter dance, a daddy-daughter class, just a daddy-daughter, do it. They'll remember it and you'll love it.
Awesome.
Well,
Thanks for sharing that, Tom.
gents, we're at the end of this Gallocast. I can't believe they just get better and better. So I'm going to start sending you your questions.
You know
Maybe
what's
I
my
won't even
favorite
send you
episode, Tom?
questions.
You know what's my
Pardon?
favorite episode?
Yeah.
All of them.
Oh.
I'm going to quit sending you the topics. So you just get better and better the later I send you the topics.
Maybe that's what it is. There's a correlation there. Well, it's been great, Tom. Thanks for having us on. It's always great to chop it up with you. And thank you to our loyal fans, listeners, and followers for joining us today on the Gallocast. It's always great to hang out with you guys. We'll see you next time.